I wanted to talk to Heather Cox Richardson because I'm a student of politics, nothing like her. I grew up in a political family, as many of you know, and I'm always trying to make sense. This is called Making Sense with Maria. Who can make sense of the world we live in? I don't know. Not me, maybe Heather. So thank you for brain health. Thank you so much for all of you who support that. But I think, this is a time where we want to make sense of what's happening in our country, and we need a guide. And she's an incredible guide. Her book was a big bestseller. It was called Democracy Awakening. You can still buy it. You can subscribe to her extraordinary newsletter that's called Letters from an American. It's on Substack. And every day she just grinds it out, explaining, making sense, giving insight, and all this knowledge that she has accumulated. So Sunday Paper Plus, hey Dana, thank you. I love that. And when she gets off, I'll just talk to you. Maybe we'll do an Ask Me Anything. I've never done one of those. Woo. I don't know. There's Heather Cox Richardson. There she is. Hi, Heather.
How are you? It's good to see you.
Nice to see you again. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. A little tired. I can't believe we're already at the end of February, but it's a leap year, so we got an extra day this time.
That's right. We do. I was just saying how much I love speaking with you because you're so smart and because you have such great insight and you help us make sense of what is going on in our world, which is, I think, something that's really hard for people, right? To figure out, how do I make sense of what is going on in my country right now when it comes to politics? So I said, let's go to the authority. Let's go to the woman who I go to. And so, Heather, help us make sense this morning after Michigan, a week before Super Tuesday. People are disillusioned, kind of feeling like, is this all wrapped up? Do I get any choice in this presidential issue? Should I care? Why? Heather is frozen. So maybe we'll be able to get Heather back in just a moment. I hope. But all of you who are here, there's almost 1,000 of you. She's in Maine and it's frozen up there, somebody said. So maybe it happens to be live. It happens in live TV. That's true. Trust me, I'm well versed in that, Mike. But thank you. You're right. I've had to vamp more times than I can remember on live television. That's how I grew up on live TV, when things didn't happen and live shots went down. So you just vamped and kept talking, which I'm going to do right now because Heather's not there, but all of you are here, almost 1,000 of you. So I want to make sure that I'm talking about what matters. And what I wanted to talk to Heather about was not just what happened in Michigan, not just what's going to happen on Super Tuesday, but what is happening in our country at large. How do we stay engaged? How do we stay hopeful? How do we stay optimistic? Those are the questions that I'm really interested in, that I ask myself and that I ask others. I'd like to know from all of you, how do you stay open? How do you stay optimistic? How do you stay believing in our democracy and in our elections? That's what's super interesting to me. So, Heather.
I hope I'm here this time. Am I here for real?
You're here for real. You're here for real.
Okay, fingers crossed. This is one of the reasons we need broadband across this country. What I was gonna, because I live in the woods.
Okay.
One of the what I was going to say was, I'm so glad you asked me the question that you did when you did, because that idea of being disillusioned and what you do matter and all that is actually what I've been writing about all day, because it finally hit me after the Michigan primary of last night that what we're seeing is a major political realignment in this country. The Republican Party is dying. The Democratic Party is rebuilding and creating a new identity for itself. And this looks very much to me like a number of times in our past when there's kind of like this butterfly soup, that old expression that you don't go from.
Oh, bummer. Come on. Maine. I'm going to send a letter to the governor of Maine. You need broadband up there. Come on, Maine is such a beautiful state. And you have the greatest expert and professor in the country. And she needs better internet. Oh my God, come on. She needs better internet. Okay, but what she's saying is absolutely right. There is a realignment going on. It reminds me, I think, hello, Heather, can you hear me? No. But I think when she was talking there, it made me think about how many of us in our lives have to reclaim a new identity, right? If your kids go off and you've been a full-time mom or a full-time dad, you have to reclaim a new identity, right? If you become a grandmother, you're reclaiming a new identity. If you get separated in your marriage or get divorced, you have to reclaim a new identity. If you start a new job, you have to reclaim a new identity. And both of these political parties are in the process, which she was just saying, of doing that exact thing, reintroducing themselves in a way to us, the voting public. There you go. It's okay.
You know, I'm sorry. It is what it is. But when that happens, when we get that period when everything kind of falls apart and we get political soup, you know, like I said, the butterfly soup, where you don't go from a caterpillar to a butterfly, you turn into soup first. That's not actually true, but that's the old saying about that. We're kind of in political soup. And when that happens, what has happened in our past, in the 1850s, the 1890s, the 1940s and 50s, for example, people start to rethink what they want out of their government and out of democracy. And when they do, it becomes this incredibly creative, thoughtful period when we reinvent American democracy. So why does it matter to be involved now? Well, first of all, because we don't want to lose our democracy. So that's the first thing. Just cast your vote. If you don't care about anything else, cast your vote for democracy and walk away. But the reality is that if we are all involved in this moment, we get to define what the future looks like. And that means you've got to bring to it your political principles, sure, but your artistic sense and your love for your neighbors and for all the pieces of what make you to bring them to the service of the nation. And that's actually really exciting and fun, as opposed to, oh my God, I got to listen to another primary. So one of the things you saw in the primary last night was that Trump is not popular. You know, he's just not popular. But what is popular, we are still inventing.
What I think is great about that, but I think so much of the coverage of politics is about two people or one third person who wants to be one of the two people, right? And it's so people focused. But what you're saying is step back and let's create a party. Let's create a new vision. Let's lay down some new values or strengthen the values that are already here. Is it to pay less attention to the two people and more about the vision for the country?
It's not just those two people. I mean, that's one of the mistakes we make, I think, is to envision our politics as a few people pulling all the strings. In fact, our politics is about us. You know, it's our voices that convince different elected leaders to move in different directions. It's our voices that create new organizations. It's our voices that say, hey, climate change is really important to me, or IVF is really important to me, or feeding kindergartners is really important to me, or a strong national defense system is important to me. It's actually us. They work for us, not the other way around. And we lose that a lot, I think, in our country and the way we talk about politics. Politics is about agency, your ability to change the future. And we need to grab that in this moment as those different cards are falling out of the sky to go into new patterns in front of us.
Heather, is it a good way for people to think about that, though, is maybe to think about it more about what's going on the local level? If you're disillusioned about, oh my God, we're having a rematch, or how did we end up here? Who can make sense of this? But to think about those issues that you think are important. You just mentioned IVF, so much news around IVF, right? You talk about climate change, you talk about school lunches, you talk about, maybe it's a woman's right to choose. Those things are very often decided locally in local democracy, right? And so if you happen to find yourself like, I can't make sense of what's going on nationally, is it wise to turn your attention to what's going on right in front of you?
100%, 100%. And also to find friends. find your squad, as they say, so that you're actually not doing this alone, that you're part of a larger organization. I do love the image that somebody pointed out, that if in fact you're trying to unravel a giant blanket, you may not be the person unraveling that whole blanket, but so long as you're pulling on your thread alone, if you got a lot of friends pulling on threads together, you can make the whole project work. And as I say, that's part of our history. That's how we create change. That's how we have moved this country in better directions in the past, is when people work together and recognize that the government belongs to them and not to somebody who's pulling the strings that you have no control over. I always worry when people say to me, what's going to happen? What are they going to do to me? It's not time for that yet. Right now, it's time for, what am I going to do to change what the future looks like?
But giving people, when you talk about what am I going to do, you talk about agency. People don't feel like they have it. They don't feel like they have power. They don't feel like they have agency. They feel like they can't make sense of what's happening. It feels, and so they turn away. They try to go like, okay, well, I'm just going to focus on my family, on my corner, or on my home.
Well, I'm not against the idea of focusing on your family or your garden or your neighbors. I think that that's a perfectly legitimate way to resist the encroachment of authoritarians who want to control every aspect of your life. But I think as you start to make that corner of your life beautiful, there is plenty of room to reach out to a neighbor, or to reach out to the school board, or to reach out to the state legislature, or to reach out to your congressperson, or eventually to reach out to national newspapers or wherever your future takes you. But the key part of that is to recognize that the way you have control over your destiny is to take that control. Don't wait till somebody gives it to you. Take that control. Take your agency and say, you know what? I'm not going to wait to be told what to do. I'm going to take the future into my own hands and start to make a difference. Whether that means picking up the trash in front of the elementary school or running for office.
We've talked about, democracy, the importance of supporting democracy. And I get the feeling that when I talk to a lot of people about democracy, they're like, what are you talking about exactly? What are you asking me to vote for exactly? What does that's a big word. It's on the title of your book. We hear, Joe Biden talking about it a lot. We heard at that big conference in Washington, people saying, we came to get democracy on January 6th and we want to dismantle it. Could you boil down for people who are sitting at home, and there are a lot of them with us today, democracy means this to you?
The right to be treated equally before the law and the right to have a say in your government. Both of those things are guaranteed in the Declaration of Independence. And there's a real difference between people who are fighting for democracy to expand those rights to their neighbors and those who are fighting for their version of democracy that takes those rights away. So the January 6th people were trying to take away the rights of the rest of us to choose our president. That was not an attempt to expand democracy. That was an attempt to contract it. The people who were fighting for the American Revolution, in contrast, were fighting to expand that democracy. So the idea of democracy has many different layers in it. There's, we can talk about economic democracy and all sorts of things, but fundamentally in the United States, it's the right to be treated equally before the law and the right to have a say in your government. And if you have those two things, the rest will come.
I love that what you were saying in the beginning, just even if you don't like the two people, just vote for democracy and go on about your way. And for many people, I think maybe it's better to say, or maybe different to say, vote for the person who wants to expand democracy, as opposed to the party that might want to restrict it, that might want to take your rights away, that might want to end up in your bedroom or tell you what you can and cannot do with your body. And this is what that big word and those conversations are really all about. And what I like about Heather, you're really constantly going, wake up, America, right? Wake up, because there's some really serious things on the line. This can't be the time to, yes, you can tend to your family. Yes, you can tend to your garden. Yes, you can tend to your local issues. But there's some big, important stuff going down on a national and really international, who we are globally, who we present ourselves as. What does it mean to be America in 2024?
Yes. And what I find so important in this moment is not only protecting that, but recognizing that this makes you part of a much longer history of our great leaders like Fannie Lou Hamer and Sitting Bull and, Abraham Lincoln and, the people who really worked to expand that vision. And it also, as I say, comes from a place of joy. We have the right to construct the government that we want. We don't have to put up with somebody else telling us how to live. And this is the moment when we make that manifest, to take those ideas and in this political soup, if you will, while the Republican Party is falling apart and the Democratic Party is rebuilding itself, and we have all these exciting things going on, now is the time to take a deep breath and step forward and say, not only am I casting my ballot because that's my civic duty, I'm going to have a say in what the future looks like. And that future can take on gun safety and can take on equality before the law and can take on climate change and can take on sovereignty of nations and can take on all the things that will enable us to create a more just and equitable future. It's really exciting.
So people think, like, you're sitting there going, it's exciting. It can be actually use the word joyful or joy experiment. And yet everybody's like, ugh. When I talk to people about politics, they're just like, oh my God, can you believe what's going on? It's the opposite of what you're describing. Am I talking to the wrong people, or do you talk to people who also feel like that? And you find yourself going, no, this can be exciting. This can be joyful. This can be creative.
I'm laughing a little bit because I was complaining just yesterday that I did not want to write another stupid letter about the same things. You know what's going to happen, right? The Republicans are radicalizing. They're not going to put stuff through Congress. There's a lot about the daily business of politics that is not terribly exciting, and that's okay. I think if governance is going well, it's a little boring, to be honest, but I always love the big picture. I just love and actually I'm writing a big piece this weekend, I hope. When you look at things like taxes, okay, that may not sound very interesting, but what they're really about is, what should the government do for the people who live in a society, and who should pay for it?
Yeah.
Those are really interesting questions, right? And
I have that conversation all the time with my kids and their friends, where they're constantly talking about, I can't believe the taxes and what I make and what I end up with. And I'm like, well, who's going to pay for? And they're like, well, not me. And I'm like, well, who is? It's such a fascinating conversation where people are like, well, I think I will pay for the police and the fire, but that's it. Or so I think that's such an incredible thing that you're going to write about that, because, what do we actually owe the country that we live in? What should we be paying for? What is our tithe as we give to our church, right? Or what do we think that's fair to live in a country, a democracy, where I can practice my religion, where I have free speech, where I can vote the way I want to vote, where I have a judicial system. So for that, I should pay.
Yes, and we will not all agree on what those things should be, but that's a really interesting question. And one of the other things that I'm actually working on for the weekend is the idea of antitrust. Again, you feel eyelids closing, and yet how big really should a company get? I mean, should it be able to raise prices so that it's maybe cheaper for them to make stuff, but way more expensive for us to pay? Or should we break that up so that there's more opportunities for people to enter into the market? That's been a question that has been part of United States history since the very beginning. And we have to think those questions through again. But it's not just a question of saying, gee, do I really want Kroger to mix with another supermarket? And why does that matter to me? There's a much larger question about having a right to a say in our government, living in the kind of society we want to live in, and creating the kind of change we want to see. And the bigger picture things are the things that have always drawn me. Yeah, I get as bored as everybody else does by the latest vote on the latest procedural thing in Congress. Like you sit there and think, how do they do this? But the larger picture is about who we are as Americans. Yes. And to me, endlessly fascinating, because who gets counted in that as an American is vitally important to the outcome.
So, so many people, as I was beginning to say, so particularly so many young people that I speak with, do feel like this process makes no sense to me. The Electoral College makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me that by next Tuesday, it'll all be decided and millions and millions and millions of us haven't even gotten a say. This whole system needs to be changed.
Well, so let me just back a little bit off that. I would be the first to say we have real problems within our system because it is no longer guaranteeing that there is a majority in power. Okay, so there's a problem just from the start there. But there's two ways to look at our government. You can look at it as people on the far right and the far left do and say, democracy is terrible, we got to tear it all down and rebuild something else. And my problem with that is on the right, what they always want to rebuild is authoritarianism. And on the left, they've never come up with any system that doesn't turn into being authoritarian. So people like me, the ones who say democracy is flawed, it is not operating the way it should. We've got some real problems in this country, but it can be fixed. And it's the fixing part that I find interesting and exciting. I think it's not illegitimate to say it's frustrating to live in a society where, because of the way that the Electoral College altered, it was never intended to be a winner-take-all system. I think it's okay to say we got a real problem here, but the question is, do we burn the system down and hope something good replaces it when nothing else ever has? Or do we say, fix the system we've got? And that's what the camp I'm firmly, let's fix the system we've got rather than let's burn it down and start again.
I love that, Heather. For people who want to take away, like want to go to a kitchen table, want to go to a party and say, I heard Heather Cox Richardson say, here are two ways we can fix the system. She also thinks the Electoral College system is flawed. She also thinks that we can do better than we're doing. And she suggested two things. What do you think?
Well, if you could make me empress of the universe, the first thing I would do, and this is going to sound weird because, I like tax policy. The first thing I would do is significantly raise taxes on the very wealthy people in the United States. Mm-hmm. For this reason, for many reasons. Of course, we're in a period when we have extraordinarily low taxes. Yeah. But the real thing that I think is a problem in this particular context is that there's so much money washing through politics right now that ordinary people don't have the power that they ought to. When a multi-billionaire can simply say, I'm going to dump so much money into the state parties that I'm going to be able to run the state legislatures of these states and therefore have a bigger say in the Electoral College, that's a problem. Now, I'm probably not going to get that, but a very simpler, at least not in the short term, because my Empress papers are probably a little bit stuck in the mail. But the other thing is, even with the Electoral College, there are a number of ways that people are trying to work around it. And my answer to that is, let's bring back the proportional system in the Electoral College, which is the way it was supposed to work, rather than winner take all, which means we end up with a very few states getting to be the only swing states in the country. If things were proportional again, that politicians would have to compete in all the states because they would need those proportional electors. And you saw that in 2020 when Donald Trump campaigned in Maine, because Maine and Nebraska are the two states that still split their electoral votes. He wanted one vote, but he came all the way up to Maine to do that. So that's one thing I would do. And I'd really like to see money out of politics as well. Yeah. But there are many different ways in which our system is not currently represented, it does not currently represent the majority. Our Supreme Court's in real trouble. There's a number of things that I think we should do with the Supreme Court. But the good news is going forward here is that, again, historically in our country, we have long periods we don't change the Constitution, and then we have short periods where we add a lot to the Constitution. And it's been a long time since we've adjusted the Constitution. My guess is that in our lifetimes, Maria, I'll say that, you and I will see the Constitution adjusted to make sure that a minority cannot essentially hack it and take over.
What would have to happen for that to happen?
For the you don't mean literally the adjustments to the Constitution?
Yeah.
We need, all of us in our country, Democrat, Independent, Republican, need to stand up and say we back democracy, we back the system, and we are not going to back the people who want to tear it down. Once we have supported democracy again, then we can hash out what that looks like to protect democracy. And I firmly believe that the majority of us want that. We want it. We're having a problem with the fact that the minority has sewn up some important nodes of democracy that have made it possible for them to do things like stop legislation from going through the House of Representatives.
So people say, like, God, are you going to talk to Heather Cox Richardson? The government's going to shut down again? I mean, is this really serious? I mean, how could this be? How could this be happening? And, you know, I always try to step back and go, it's better than anywhere else. We have way more freedoms than any other country in the world. As you just said, there are things, as always, in your own home and everywhere that need adjusting, that need growth, that need fixing. But if we get involved, if we believe that it's possible, that's a big part of it. If we just give up and say, it makes no sense, I'm out, right? But that your whole philosophy, which I love, is that every single person has a vote and has power. And I want you to leave people with that they have tremendous power right now. Even if one of these candidates is not coming to their state, they still have power.
The way you change politics is to change the way people think. And the way you change people think is the way you change the way people think is that you make sure your voice is heard, and you find your friends and you speak together and you speak up, not only by voting, but by, you know, talking to people, by writing letters to the editor, by calling your Congress critters, by making sure that what you care about is on the table. And do politicians respond to that? 100%. Not all of them, but by any stretch of the imagination. But younger people coming up will recognize that if they want to get your vote, they've got to act in particular ways. And that matters. That's how you change the ship of state. I will say one thing that I always want to point out to people when they complain that they feel the government is not responding to them in this moment. You know, I'm watching the Biden administration incredibly closely, probably better than anybody else in the country, actually. And they're working incredibly hard to do the things that will make people be treated equally before the law, have equal access to resources, and get to have a say in their government. But we have let that ship of state drift a very long way from the mooring for 40 years. And it ain't coming back in 3 years. This is going to be a much longer process of recreating American society. And as I say, when you think about what we can do in this moment, when so much is required of us to address climate change, to address the attempt to tear apart the international order, to address the rise of oligarchs and authoritarians, it's wildly exciting to think about the fact that this is our mission in our lifetime, and this is our time to stand up and be counted. It's scary, and sometimes it's boring, and sometimes you wish you could go to sleep earlier. But nobody who gets stuck in a moment like this says, hey, this is great, I get to be miserable in this process. What they do get to say is, I did the right thing when it really mattered. And at the end of the day, that's really what it means to be a human being, right?
I love that. Heather Cox Richardson, thank you so much. I love our conversations. Let's keep them going. And people actually said that they love them too. And you're so wise. And what I love is that you put it back on us. My mother used to always do that. Complain, don't complain, put it back on you. What are you going to do, right? Where's your role? Because we all do have a role. We all do have tremendous power, as Heather was saying. And she puts it all in context that we let it go because we weren't paying attention. And now we got to pull it back, and we can write it, and we can add to it, and we can be creative, and we can have our voices heard. But the worst thing is to complain and then do nothing about it. So I want to thank you for joining us from Maine. We're going to all send a letter to the governor there about the broadband. I mean, come on.
Listen, I'm back on the road next week, and I'll be back in civilization. But it just happens to be a place where we haven't managed to get wires yet.
You're smart. From the woods, from the trees, from out of civilization and in civilization. So I'll talk to you anywhere, anytime. Thank you, Heather Cox Richardson.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of you so much for joining us, for listening to this remarkable woman, her remarkable brain, her remarkable years of studying about our country, about our history, and being able to distill it in a way that we can all understand, and most important, to a way that we can all take away and do something about it. So Heather Cox Richardson, you can get her newsletter, you can buy her book, you can hear her anytime, read her anytime, and she'll come back here some other time. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.